Hey, what's going on? Ryan, the Plan Man here. I was going to adjust my camera, but I'm afraid to touch it because sometimes it gets kind of quirky. Ryan, setthepacetriathlon.com, and back here in the human dogs play with the bones, so hopefully they'll be quiet for this quick little video. We're going to talk about bike pacing, especially pertinent to those doing, at the time of this recording, Waco and Waco 70.3 this weekend. Do you just go out there and just hammer a certain speed? Or do you have a little bit more thought process behind your bike pacing strategy? So we're going to dive into it real quick. Trying to catch this video live before the kids come home early for parent-teacher conference day. We'll be making, I don't know. So if you hear people yelling and screaming upstairs as I make this video down in the headquarters of Set the Pace Triathlon, pardon the interruption. But anyway, bike pacing. So number one, pace doesn't mean just speed. So I put that in the comments there. Do you just aim for 25 miles per hour, 17, 16? You know, we all kind of go into a race. I'd love for every race I go into to be over 20 miles an hour. Now, is that realistic? Probably not. It just depends on the terrain, the weather conditions, all different kind of situations kind of arise that affect speed, and it's not exactly a pure measure of your effort. So it could be really hilly, and you have to work really hard to get like 15 miles an hour. It's just, you know, that's just the way it works out. So speed is not the end-all be-all when it comes to figuring out a bike pace strategy. Number two, there are a lot of other factors that can affect heart rate for a longer ride. So heart rate is another way to pace your ride. So if you don't have power meters and other stuff, we'll talk about that at the next point. Heart rate's a good place to kind of get in there and measure it. Hey, Harley, saw your comments. Glad you're getting some good info out of this. So heart rate is another way to measure it. And you got to keep in mind, though, heart rate isn't, you know, I use wrist-based heart rate because I don't like messing with heart rate straps. Wrist heart rate is plus or minus 5 to 10 beats a minute sometimes, depending on where you have it on your wrist. Sometimes in the ride, I turn my watch inside out so I can see an arrow. So it's going to be, you know, it's a good indicator of kind of how hard you're working, but it's not going to be a precise measurement in any given time necessarily. Over the length of a ride, it can kind of even out to a nice average or something like that. So if you're averaging, you know, if you're shooting for a heart rate zone 3 for a Ironman 7.3 ride, over time you can see your average heart rate and kind of know that you're in that window. But there's a lot of factors that, you know, there's creep over time. You know, with fatigue, your heart rate just climbs up higher and higher when your body has to work harder and harder to kind of give the same output. Your body just gets tired, and that's just the fact of the matter. So messed up my watch there. Next point is power is more pure. 100 watts is 100 watts. So basically it's how much force you're putting in either pedal based, crank arm, hub, whatever you're doing. Power is power, watts is watts. You know, it's a little bit more. You do have to be careful depending on where your power meter is. It can kind of vary. You got a smart trainer, you're going to pedals or something like that outdoor. There's a little bit of a variance. You have to take that into account as well. So just keep that in mind when you're using power. But power is more pure. It takes into account how much effort you have to overcome the terrain, the wind, the climate, the conditions. If it's raining, if it's hot, if it's, you know, a windy road, if you have to start and stop a lot or something like that, or slow down for turns and start up hills and stuff like that. Power is a more precise way to measure. So speed, if you got nothing else, heart rate is kind of a good kind of in-betweener, and then power is kind of the ultimate way to more precisely measure kind of the output that you're doing on the bike portion of the ride. So the pace kind of falls out where it's at, because what I say is I advise athletes to manage the bike ride to have a successful run. And the way you manage that is by number 5, consider 75% FTP as a target power, or 75% of, there should be an of in there, should be an of. 75% of FTP is a target power and adjust for weather and other factors. So if your FTP is 100 and you're targeting 75%, that's 75 watts over the length of your ride, whatever it's Olympic, sprint, 70.3, full Ironman, something else like that. I like to look at normalized power because it takes out, there's going to be places where you're coasting, there's places you're really hammering and go up the hills. Sometimes a power meter, you just start pedaling and it spikes for some reason or something. I mean, it's not totally unfallible. It happens. So the normalized power over time kind of gets you a nice even number. It takes out the highs and the lows and the spikes and stuff like that. And that way, especially if you're riding hills, you're riding flats, you're riding the wind, it gives you a good indicator of kind of where you're at and where you're spending your energy. So if your target was 75 watts for an entire race, you get to mile 80 on a full Ironman race and you've been averaging 100 watts, so you're basically at FTP and you're like trying to kill it, you know, trying to attain this 20 miles per hour or something like that, or 15 miles an hour, whatever your target is, you're going to pay for it on the run. So if you don't manage that bike ride to an attainable power and don't ride outside your means, and if you don't have a way to measure it, then you're just kind of riding by feel, which you can do. But then if you don't have a nice target for that power or heart rate or pace or whatever you're doing it by, you can end up going out too hard out there, and you're going to pay for it on the run. I always like to say, number 6, you can always go harder if you have more energy later in the race, but once you use it, it's hard to find more. So if you come to the end of the bike ride and your goal was 75 and you did 95 average normalized power over the entire 112 miles or 56 miles or whatever, just be prepared, especially a full Ironman. The race doesn't start until mile 13, 14 of the run, and that's where everything is going to start showing up. Did you go too hard on the bike? Did you bike outside your means? Did you go a little bit easier so you have a little more energy? Then you can use that extra energy towards the end of the run, because once you start walking at 15, 16 minutes per mile, it's significantly slower than 10 to 11 minutes per mile. So those 4 to 5 minutes per mile add up over 13 miles. That's over an hour of time that maybe you saved 5-6 minutes by trying to go a little bit faster in a bike ride or something like that. So this is my kind of quick hit list for bike pacing strategies. I don't like to just see people just go out there and like, I want to aim for 50 miles per hour average on a bike. That's what I want to do. You know, if you do a little bit of research on the course and everything, maybe it kind of works out. The next is, I didn't put it on there, but going by feel. If you feel like you're going outside yourself and you're really trying to work really hard, maybe you need to back it off, especially for the long distance rides. Heart rate is the next best option. Wrist-based is a little bit wonky. You got to take it with a grain of salt. Chest rate strap is probably the most accurate as far as heart rate goes, but there is creep over time with heart rate as you go into long distance events. And then power is kind of the best, and then come up with a strategy for that heart rate, power, perceived rate of exertion. I always like to come off the bike. You know, if you're totally spent, totally gassed, that's going to be a long run, especially the 71.3 in the Ironman distance. You're going to spend a lot of time out there and a lot of suffering. You really don't want to do that. I saw that there was some, didn't see any other questions. Harley, hey, thanks for putting a comment on there in the video. Hopefully this helps you out. Give it a thumbs up. Share it up with your friends. If you see this later on YouTube, give it a like, give it a subscribe. Put a comment on there. If there's other ideas I missed, put them in the comments too. I'll get back to you guys. I always like to help you out, so I like to make sure it's good, pertinent information for you. And I finished it before the kids got home from the early release for parent-teacher conferences, so we are good to go. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next video.